Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you for all joining our UK Refrigerants webinar this morning. My name is Mel Summers and I'm the Marketing Manager for Climalife in the UK. Before I introduce you to our speakers, I'd just like to run through a few housekeeping points with you. A recording of the webinar will be available after today. It will be sent to everyone registering and will also be published on our Climalife YouTube channel, as well as on our website. Like many of you, we're all working remotely and reliant on the successful use of technology today. So if any issues do arise during the presentation, please do bear with us and we will try to resolve them as quickly as possible. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if you'd like to raise a question for one of our speakers, please use the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Click on the speech bubble to open the question function in the control panel, and then you can type your question in the box here. So now I'd like to introduce our presenters today. From Climalife in the UK, we have Alan Harper, Managing Director, Dave Richards, UK Head of Sales, and Peter Dinage, Technical Director. And then from Chemours, we're very pleased to welcome Mark Hughes, Business Development Manager for Thermal and Specialised Solutions. On today's agenda, Alan will give a presentation on the UK refrigerant market, topics such as Brexit, COVID, the economic situation and F-gas. Then we will look at refrigerant solutions for existing equipment, such as regenerated refrigerant options and retrofit solutions with Dave. Moving on to new equipment, Peter will talk about the move to using lower GWP refrigerants and the options that are available, also considering energy efficiency, GWP limits and equipment approvals. And then Mark will talk us through some of the refrigerants that are available today and how they compare in terms of capacity, performance and long-term cost. And then we'll answer some of the questions that have been raised both today and ahead of the webinar in our Q&A session. So as you can see, we have a very full agenda this morning. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Alan Harper. Good morning, Alan.
Yeah, morning, Mel. Thank you very much. Yeah, morning, everyone. And thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. Before we move on to the interesting technical topics, which are covered by Peter, by Dave and Mark, I just wanted to share a few words around Brexit, COVID, the economy and F-gas. Some of you remember in our webinar in September, my view on Brexit was that the government would make sure that it was delivered, but I'm not sure that any of us would have guessed that they would leave it until Christmas Eve. Yeah, at least it was delivered, so that's good. The important thing in securing the deal was to ensure that there would be a continuation of free trade between the UK and Europe. But in any case, I guess that some of you may have experienced some delays in importing or exporting products in the past weeks. Notwithstanding the volume of traffic through the ports, there seems to have been a clear lack of understanding of the new customs procedures, both at point of origin and delivery, added with unclear advice from HMRC. Products now seem to be flowing quite freely with only a few minor delays at the ports. So I, for one, am really pleased that the different customs agencies, brokers and transport companies have been working hard to make the transition as painless as possible. One area which still causes some concern, and not really because of Brexit, are the continued delays and high prices in shipping of importing products, for instance, from the Far East. Whilst from our side we're not seeing the effects so far, I think that this situation has caused many issues in the UK for our industry, as many components, equipment and parts are reliant on manufacturing in China, for instance. This problem does not seem to be going away in a hurry and could be with us for some time yet. So my advice would be to plan well ahead in advance and manage the increased costs. Unfortunately, as predicted, COVID is very, very much still with us, but I think finally we're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel. Government advised that some 18 million first doses have been given and over 600,000 second dose vaccines have been delivered, which is great news for the UK. For the moment, the vaccines are our way out of the pandemic, and it is interesting to understand that the project on how to deliver the vaccine to the nation first started in May of last year, even when it was not clear what the vaccine would look like and when it would be ready. Quite clearly, it is a huge undertaking to get this delivered, and for me personally, it was the first indication of what any benefit would look like of the UK leaving Europe. Instead of EU 28 in one room trying to come to an agreement, it was one government making the decision to ensure that there would be a programme to roll this out as quickly as possible and to save as many lives as possible. I know the government have not been perfect so far in the last year, but I think they may have at least got this right if we compare what is happening in the rest of Europe. We've all seen the announcement yesterday from the government on the easing of the restriction and the confirmation of the school reopenings, which I think is really good news. But we all, in the meantime, need to remain positive and patient. Hopefully, we'll see all adults fully vaccinated before the end of the summer, and we'll probably see some more flexibility and movement within the UK and travel abroad. Certainly, the future appears to be unclear, but we will have to work with a new reality, and COVID will be with us for many years to come, and we will have to learn to live with it and adapt ourselves. In the meantime, whether working remotely or in the office, we at Climalife continue to operate a 100% service, and we will continue to develop and improve our services, communication, and product portfolio to ensure continued satisfaction for our customers. Some of you will also remember that I was pretty upbeat about the economy last time, and the good news is I still am. Whilst COVID has certainly slowed down growth during 2020, I believe that coming out of the worst of COVID, we will all experience a global boom, and in combination with learning what Brexit will eventually look like, it will provide a lot of opportunity in the UK. For our industry, I'm especially upbeat because I think in the future we will look closer to home for products and services, which naturally will promote growth and opportunity. We see how well the pound is faring against the euro and the dollar, and I think that this will continue, and the government for sure will absolutely make sure that the economy will grow faster than that of the EU. Hold on to your seats and watch this space. It's going to be an interesting ride. F-gas. Many of you will be aware that the UK, as from January the 1st, has its own F-gas legislation that matches what is applied in the EU. All parts of the 2014 F-gas legislation, such as bans, training, record keeping, leak checking, have all been transposed to the new legislation. What is different is that the UK government is now in control of the decision-making process of determining the amount of quota issued to the producers, incumbents, and new entrants. As from the 1st of January, there has been a further 29% cut in available quota. This will take us to a total 45% reduction in quota from the original 2015 calculation. You will see from the slide that in just under 3 years' time, we will also see a further 31% reduction in quota. Now, whilst those figures seem alarming, actually, we already have the products which will allow for these quota reductions to successfully work. But, and it is a big but, we need to move a bit faster in adapting the new products and to move away from the higher GWP refrigerants. Each phase down step increases the pressure on those refrigerants, and they should encourage the use of the lower GWP refrigerants. Pressure is already coming towards the end of this year on refrigerants with a GWP of around 2000. Other important information to understand about dealing with the new UK quota system is, number one, it's not possible to buy refrigerants from EU-based companies unless they have sufficient UK quota, or you do. So, for example, we've seen some activity in the market where you may have seen offers of supply refrigerant from companies with no previous history in the UK. This means that if they are offering to distribute refrigerant in the UK, then they may be doing so illegally by using EU quota, and they will be reported to the authorities. Please do not be tempted by any offers outside of the normal established UK suppliers and distributors of refrigerant, as we all have to, as an industry, only work with the new UK quota system. Number two, you cannot transfer EU quota to UK quota system. Number three, and it's quite a big consideration, is that all imports into the UK with pre-charged equipment will now need to have authorization from a UK incumbent holder. We're seeing a lot of activity in the market in companies wanting to purchase authorizations so they can import their equipment legally. We do not think the UK government has factored this into their calculations, and it's already causing a problem. The other major important thing to note is that in all the discussions around Brexit and the new UK F-Gas legislation, Northern Ireland has kind of been hung out to dry, and in effect is being treated as though it were part of the European Union. From a supply of refrigerant and pre-charge equipment point of view, the products provided will need to be supplied from EU quota. So for example, we currently have customers both in Southern and Northern Ireland, and we will continue to supply them, but only from our European entities. Hopefully, this will give you better clarity of how the UK quota system will work, but for sure, it's not completely clear whether the numbers are correct, and I believe that there will need to be further clarification in the coming months. I've mentioned before that quite frankly, if the UK market continues to purchase in the same way that it does today, then there will not be enough product for the UK this year. The refrigerant producers will decide, depending on their total quota, what quantities for each product they will place on the market. You would therefore imagine that the products with higher GWP values will be targeted both availability and pricing wise to encourage end users to move to much lower GWP refrigerants. The issue continues in the main is that the new gases are A2L and mildly flammable and are not suitable for retrofit option. So therefore, we will all be relying on new equipment for these newer gases. There is, however, today a lot of equipment already available and more being placed on the market by the OEMs. And I would encourage you to press your equipment suppliers for equipment options for A2L refrigerants. I would also imagine that you will see some of the market continue to transition to replacement refrigerants for retrofit, knowing that in the future they will have to replace again to even lower GWP gases. Some parts of the market will move to new equipment with very low GWP A2L refrigerants, and others staying where they are because they cannot retrofit, have no money for new equipment, or the equipment's old and will be very reliant on reclaimed refrigerants for servicing requirements. Whatever the position of you or your customers, we can help you with our knowledge and advice. We continue to work hard to ensure that we remain as communicative as possible to the market and customers through, for example, webinars like today, technical videos, case studies, and other social media posts. We're also soon releasing a customer resource center online where you will find plenty of information, including technical advice to aid with the transition to the new refrigerants. If you need any further advice after this webinar, then please get in touch. Hopefully, in the very near future, we can start to again to introduce physical visits or meetings. Let's see what happens over the coming weeks. So that's about it for me. So just to summarize quickly, Brexit's done, but we now need to learn and understand how to work in a new way. Short-term pain for long-term gain. COVID, the end of the beginning is in sight. What will living and working mean in the new reality? There is a positive economic future. There's a lot of money in the pipeline waiting to be spent. And finally, the new UK quota legislation may prove to be a challenge if we do not accelerate the transition to lower GWP refrigerants. So thank you again for taking the time to listen in. Thank you for your continued support, and I look forward to any questions and catching up with you in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Certainly a lot to think about there. Next, we welcome Dave Richards. Good morning, Dave.
Thank you, Mel. Good morning, everybody. As mentioned, I'm Dave Richards, Head of Sales for Climalife UK. I've worked here for almost 17 years, advising customers on refrigerant choice and retrofit options. I'd like to talk to you today about what can be done with the existing systems. Whilst installing new equipment is advisable when a plant is near the end of its expected life, there is a lot of equipment out there that is not ready to be replaced, and many of these systems could easily be converted to a lower GWP option. I will start today with a reminder of the F-gas bans and quotas. Then I will talk about regenerated refrigerant option, moving on to how to view our last refrigerant retrofit webinar, in case you missed it. I'll then discuss some useful tips about where to find information in order to complete successful retrofits, and end up with a brief summary on what to focus on. Everyone should be aware by now of the bans in place under F-gas for refrigerants with a GWP above 2,500. Just as a reminder, virgin product is banned in all new equipment and for servicing, with the exception of topping up small systems with a charge less than 40 CO2 tons equivalent. The other exception is product being cooled below -50. However, as all products still have to be made available under the quota system, it is unlikely that the producers will have much allowance, if any, for high GWP virgin products for the market, such as 404A and R507, with all the other products that they will need to supply. The main refrigerants used today for -50 systems are R23 and R508B, which have GWPs around 14 to 15,000. There is good news in that the recently publicised Cora LFR5 or R473A is a promising new product, but it's still under development and will be a while before it becomes commercially available. You have seen the same slide in Alan's presentation, and I make no apology for its repeat. As we have seen, the F-gas quota system undergoes another key drop this year to just 45% of the 2015 baseline. This will put pressure on those systems still reliant on higher GWP refrigerants. The next big drop is 2024, making action now all the more important for any business with equipment reliant on higher GWP refrigerants. These quota reductions that originated in the EU F-gas regulations also directly apply to the UK quota reductions. For existing systems containing refrigerants with a GWP above 2,500, such as 404A and R507, to name but two, there is an option to use reprocessed refrigerant until 2030. However, reprocessed product can only be made available from existing systems that are either replaced or retrofitted, with the resultant product coming back for reclamation and reprocessing to ARI standards. That product can then be made available to the market again. In the last year or so, many end users have understandably focused on keeping their plant running during the pandemic and have avoided retrofitting. This has put pressure on the supply of reprocessed refrigerants. If the current trend continues, there is a likelihood that unplanned retrofits may have to be performed, with often inconvenient downtime, which will hit businesses harder than a properly organised and planned retrofit. I don't intend going through all the options for each refrigerant. After all, we did a webinar for that last year, and it is available on our YouTube channel. Just search there for Climalife refrigerant retrofitting and you'll find it. In that webinar, I discuss options for many different refrigerants, including all those with a GWP above 2,500, such as 404A and 507. I will cover these today, along with 407A and 407F, and also R134A. If you missed the webinar from last year, please take the time to watch it. There will be a link in our follow-up email from this webinar. There are well-documented improvements to energy efficiency in many retrofit options. This often makes a retrofit the most economical way in which to help to reduce the CO2 footprint of a plant, as well as helping meet legislation and quota limits. Common good practices are referring to retrofit guidelines, coupled with using our Climalife PT slider to check and compare pressures and temperatures from existing product to retrofit. Changing the oil at the time of conversion is always best practice, and only use an A1 retrofit solution to replace an A1 refrigerant, A1 being non-flammable and non-toxic. I do get asked a lot about A2L refrigerant suitability for retrofitting existing A1 refrigerants. The answer is always a firm no. A system designed for an A1 refrigerant will have a different safety classification and flammability rating compared to the requirements of A2L. Today, the main focus should be on retrofitting R404A and R507 systems, with the replacements for these readily available. Products such as 448A, 449A, and R452A are well stocked and at some of the best prices we have seen for several years. These are well documented and proven in the market. These products are also well suited to replace 407A and 407F. R407A and 407F have been widely used, mainly in new equipment, but also as an alternative to R404A, and also as an R404A retrofit. The GWP values of 2,107 and 1,825 respectively mean they are not banned under F-gas. With products such as 448A and 449A available with much lower GWP, it does mean they may come under pressure in terms of price and availability as the quota reductions really start to bite. The retrofit of 407A and 407F systems to 448 and 449 would be a relatively easy solution, as these refrigerants all require POE oil. Any low temperature systems operating on 407F with a high discharge temperature would benefit from an improvement if moving to 448 or 449. R134A also has a GWP well under 2,500, but there is an easy replacement with a much lower GWP value, which will ease the pressure on the quota system. R513A has less than 50% of the 1,430 GWP of R134A. This means in real terms that twice as much refrigerant becomes available under the quota system. R513A is a very close match to 134A in terms of capacity. Very little other changes are required in terms of expansion valves and oil, as it will be the same oil type and viscosity for R513A as with R134A. R513A is an azeotrope, that is, it has no glide, which is fairly unique in today's choices of refrigerants. R513A also has a good number of compressor approvals, and manufacturers have new equipment available with this refrigerant as an alternative to R134A. Before we move on to my final message, I've left out R410A. To date, there are no fully proven solutions for all applications. My colleague Peter will be looking closer at this as the next speaker. So, today's final message from me is to encourage your customers to get on and retrofit systems that can be easily changed to lower GWP refrigerants. Don't wait until you cannot get reprocessed refrigerant and subsequently have unplanned downtime. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Dave. Some really important points to note there. Next to present this morning is Peter Dinage. Morning, Peter.
Morning, Mel. Morning, everyone. As you can see, I'm the Technical Director at Climalife UK. What I want to talk to you about this morning is new equipment. You've heard from Dave about retrofitting and how retrofitting from the very high GWP refrigerants such as 404 has enabled us to stay within the quota limits, and you've heard from Alan that we cannot use the same amount of quota as we used last year because of the next phase down step. So all the easy wins have happened. So to get the next gain on quota, to stay within quota, it's going to turn to new equipment, and we're going to have to start moving new equipment to lower GWP refrigerants. Now that start has already happened, but it needs to speed up. And the reality is that when we come to new equipment installs, they only happen at a fraction of the rate that conversions do. But when looking for the different refrigerants out there, you need to not just consider GWP. It's not a race to the lowest GWP. It's also looking at energy efficiency. And I think we're all aware that climate change and energy efficiency is going to become a major player over the next few years. And whilst you're looking and deciding what to use now, you've got to be making those decisions based on that equipment being serviceable for the next 10 to 15 years at least, and in some cases 20, possibly 25 years. And whilst it would be nice if there was one solution for all applications, the reality is that no one refrigerant can cover the whole wide range of applications that we use refrigerants for. And therefore, when you're looking at what you've used up to now, don't always look for exact matches for that same refrigerant. The equipment manufacturers have been very inventive and looking at lots of different options, so they will have a very, very big influence, both in terms of the operating conditions and which refrigerants to use in their equipment. And they've been working on approving the new refrigerants that have come to market for the last 4 or 5 years now. And within F-Gas, we've got some more bans coming in for new equipment in 2022 for some commercial applications. So what type of refrigerants should we be looking at for new equipment? There's a whole different range of refrigerants that are available on the market. All of those are stocked and sold by ourselves in the UK, so there is quite a wide choice. But in reality, the choice isn't as big as it looks. Only the top 3 on that list are retrofit options. All the rest can only really realistically be used in new equipment. So you've got a choice of the non-flammable A1 refrigerants, the lower flammability A2L refrigerants, and then you've got the higher flammable A3 refrigerants, and sitting in between the two is ammonia for industrial applications. Bearing in mind that we need to be moving to lower GWP, then the range becomes sort of even more limited as we move forward throughout the F-gas phase down. So selecting from the different refrigerants, it's a steady process to work out exactly what you want to use. There are a whole range of different applications, and how the application is affected by safety, by pressure, by toxicity, and the environmental impact, that will narrow it down to what you can use. But the real deciding factors tend to be, the thermophysical properties of the refrigerants themselves as to what they can achieve. So the key is the operating temperature that you want to work at, the charge size, the coefficient of performance, the capacity, the energy efficiency, the mass flow, and the temperature glide all need to be taken into account within the design of the system. So therefore, the equipment manufacturers have a very big part to play for trying to come up with equipment solutions for the applications that you want to use. A whole range of different refrigerants can be used to try and achieve that. But coming back to this F-gas phase down chart, it's very important to look at what refrigerants you're using. Obviously, going forward, you want to be looking further to the right than to the left. It becomes more of a problem for new equipment. There is already a wide amount of equipment out there, as we've already heard, that requires servicing from time to time when it has leaks. But when you're selecting new equipment now, should you be looking at refrigerant with a very high GWP when we're in a situation in 2021 where the theoretical average is 900 GWP. Now that is a theoretical average, and it's taken based on the 2015 figures. So there's no issue in putting in refrigerant in new equipment above GWP of 900, as long as that is counterbalanced by others using lower GWP to the right. And as we move down the steps, then we need to be considering what may have been good to put in new equipment 2 or 3 years ago, in another 5 years' time, may be more questionable. Now, for some applications, they will be absolutely necessary, where you need a non-flammable refrigerant, but there's other applications where you can quite comfortably use the much lower GWP refrigerants, and it's important that we look at that. But the good news is that we've moved on and come a long way in the last couple of years. The low GWP refrigerants that you saw to the right of the last screen are already in use, and their use is growing rapidly. We're seeing in the press and on the internet that there's new equipment being launched with low GWP refrigerants almost every day, and it's impossible now to keep track of who's approved what in each equipment because of the numbers. But chillers are already using 1234YF, 1234ZE, 513A and 515B, and then in commercial applications, we're already seeing the use of 454A and 454C and 455A, and there's a range of condensing units from a number of manufacturers already approved for HFO blends. These tend to be relatively small charge systems, so are ideally suited to the low GWP A2L refrigerants. And the good news is that those people manufacturing those condensing units have already done a lot of the risk assessment for you and can provide you with that information. Similarly, on the air conditioning side, we've seen a very large move to R32 in small split systems, where the numbers are suggesting that sort of 80% of all new small splits going in are in R32, and chillers have been launched with both R32 and 454B, and we're also starting to see some heat pumps come into market with 454B and 32 as well. And then on the low pressure centrifugal chillers for organic Rankine cycle systems, 1233ZD is starting to be used, and we're already well aware that CO2 is being used in supermarkets and ammonia and industrial applications. But equally, in both the supermarkets and in the industrial applications, there are also markets for the A2L low GWP refrigerants as well, where it may not always be possible to use CO2 or ammonia for various reasons. And then finally, we've got the hydrocarbons that are used in small hermetic systems. But all of this work has been done by the equipment manufacturers deciding what works in their systems for the operating conditions that are needed for your applications. Now, just one quick case study to just show you, which is very close to our hearts because it's our office block that we moved into at the beginning of last year. It's a 3-story office block, a mix of open plan working areas, offices, meeting rooms. We've got an IT comms room as well there. We needed it to provide heating and cooling, and obviously with someone who is actively promoting the use of lower GWP refrigerants, when we went out to find out what type of systems we could install, the first number of contractors we spoke to all came up with 410 options. It was obvious that we couldn't put 410. We didn't see 410 as the right option for new equipment going into these offices. So we spoke to a couple of other people who came up with proposals to put in a mix of multi-split and split air conditioning systems on R32, and that's what we went ahead with, and we can report certainly that in 18 months of being in the building, all is working well, on the systems. But when you're looking at new equipment and you're looking to move to perhaps refrigerants that you haven't typically used, you've got to make sure that you're looking at the standards that exist. EN 378 isn't just a case for A2L and A3 refrigerants. You should be using it for A1 refrigerants, and there are other standards for different types of applications that should be consulted. Any engineers that are working on any refrigerant, whatever it is, needs to be well trained to work on all applications, so that you're looking after both their safety and that of the end users. So good training is required on the knowledge of the refrigerants that they're working to, and obviously depending on the refrigerant, they need the right equipment to be able to work with the refrigerants. To some extent, it's all good best practice, but it still surprises us how that there are a number of people out there who don't seem to either fully understand what the best practices are, or they're working to try and find shortcuts to get around this. But using the good principles of refrigeration, and I think the knowledge that is out there and the training programs that are available, there should be no excuse for not working to best practices. And to some extent, this is what F-Gas tries to do in terms of reducing leaks and making sure that everything is working as well as it possibly can. So just before I hand over to the next speaker, I'd just like to quick summary. That is to say that Climalife can help you move to lower GWP refrigerants. Keep planning ahead for each cut in the F-gas phase down. And please, unless you absolutely need to, please try and use lower GWP refrigerants. The higher GWP refrigerants in new equipment are going to become more problematic as time goes on. And don't forget the energy efficiency. It's going to be very important to achieve the carbon neutral and zero net emission goals that have been set for us. But we've got plenty of expert advice to help you move to these low GWP refrigerants, so don't be afraid to ask. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. And as Peter says, there's plenty of expert advice available from ourselves and our partners. So if anybody's unsure of their next steps with regards to any of the topics covered today, please don't hesitate to get in touch. So moving on, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker now, Mark Hughes from Chemours. Good morning, Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mel, and thanks for the opportunity to speak in this webinar. I'm going to be talking about refrigerants ready now, which are ready now for the future, specifically our range of Option A2L refrigerants. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm Business Development Manager with Chemours in our new division, Thermal and Specialised Solutions. So first, I just want to introduce a little bit about our new division. The refrigerant side of Chemours has been inside our fluorochemicals division since we split up from DuPont more than 5 years ago. But we've now formed a Thermal and Specialised Solutions division to recognise the types of work that we do with our products. So why thermal management and specialised solutions? Well, you know, the products and technologies we sell today have very unique properties, and we are dealing with the thermal energy in gases and fluids. And from that point of view, we're handling both cooling and heating. And also we want to direct ourselves to the future of things like such as electric vehicles, battery cooling, and a very key area is around energy efficiency. And you've already heard a bit about that today from people like Peter. You know, the focus on energy efficiency and zero carbon is a very big one across the whole planet when we look towards climate change. So our overall mission is to provide products and solutions that meet your needs today, but also for tomorrow. So really, we're into the heavily into the F-gas changes, which means that we're driving new refrigeration systems into new refrigerants that will either have a level of explosivity, toxicity, or flammability to some degree over the next few years. So that's just a must-have. Today I'm going to be talking about products which have a level of flammability, but a low level of flammability. So this is our portfolio of products, and it's shown in a slightly different way to the charts that you've seen before. Towards the top, we see the very high GWP refrigerants. You can already see that 404A in refrigeration is basically out of the game. The next on the list, if you like, the next in the crosshairs is 410A for air conditioning, heat pumps and chillers, for instance. With the average GWPs dropping year by year, products like that are going to be increasingly under pressure. If you move to the left-hand side of the screen, you can see products XP40 and XP44, which Dave has talked about as retrofit, and these are obviously very commonly used now as retrofit solutions, but are going to be less useful as new install products as we go forward to much lower GWPs. Then we move down to 134A, R32, which is basically as an interim for use in small splits. Our product 513A, which also Dave has already mentioned, obviously is a retrofit for 134A, but still is a useful product going forward with a relatively low GWP. Then we move to 454B, which is our flagship product for chillers. I'll say a little bit more of that later on. And then the main focus is going to be on these very low GWP products, particularly products like XL20, 454C, with the GWP less than 150, and eventually right down to YF itself, which has a very, very low GWP. So I'm going to talk a little bit about air conditioning and heat pumps here. As I said before, small splits are dominated by R32. With the GWP above 600, it's going to be under pressure as we go forward, but the lifetime of small splits is small, and they can be replaced probably with lower GWP products in the future relatively quickly. Chillers, which obviously are a high spend item and have a long life expectancy, need to be moving to low GWP products like XL41, 454B, and as Peter has said, there are announcements all the time about new equipment coming onto the market, and indeed in the last few weeks, Trane has announced a whole range of products available on this refrigerant, which really does actually future-proof their chiller and heat pump models for commercial use. On heat pumps for the more domestic end of the market, for the smaller end, we see this incredibly large growth predicted for the UK as we move away from gas boilers. We're actually beginning to see units now with our product 454C, XL20 with a GWP less than 150. So you will increasingly see products with those in the market. But this is very much OEM driven from that point of view, but as we know, new equipment is going to be an important part of the mix. My main focus today is really going to be about refrigeration solutions, and there's three main products in there, as I've mentioned. The pure YF, which we call XL10, with a very low GWP replacing 134A. But the two key ones for us are 454C, XL20, and 454A with XL40, which are used either in hermetic or condensing unit type equipment from that point of view. And in the case of packs, can be used in less than 40 kilowatt packs. 454A with a GWP of 238 can be used in packs with a GWP with a capacity of less than 40 kilowatts. So what about competitive products? Well, you know, as we move into the A2 era and we look at products, you know, with very low GWPs, less than 150, there are competitive products available. And, you know, how do you choose and how do we compare? So the thing that's useful nowadays is instead of doing theoretical comparisons, we can now actually use the manufacturer, the compressor manufacturers and condensing unit manufacturers' own software. And so the comparisons I'm going to show you now are based on the BITSA comparison software. So we use 404A as our baseline, and looking at capacity, you can see that one of the competitive products is 455A. You know, it's a pretty close match in terms of capacity across the range. And if we look at our product XL20, there's only a very small difference in capacity across the range. If you look at the theoreticals, you see much bigger differences, but actually in reality, the differences actually are quite small. And those capacity differences can easily be compensated for because we're talking about new equipment designs. So really, there's actually no issue with using products like XL20 in condensing unit type applications. What we see as a real improvement is when we look at energy performance. So we've been able to design a product which gives us better performance than 404A across the major part of the application range. In the case of the 455A, we see a drop-off in performance at the lower ambient conditions. Obviously, those are the conditions that we see more likely in the UK from that point of view. So from a point of view of COP, we're getting for XL20 COPs somewhat about 13% higher than 404A, which is actually a significant amount when you're looking at cost and energy saving. And that will come through in some of the graphs that I show later on in this presentation. So using that software and then adding to it, you know, a product which is started to be commonly used in things like condensing units, and that's CO2. But what you can see on here, if you look at COP, this is one of the reasons why CO2, although it's become a popular choice for centralized systems in supermarkets, it's probably not a very good choice, particularly with the ambience that we get in the UK. Even within the ambience we get in the UK, obviously we know in hot climates that CO2 suffers because of its thermodynamic properties. But even in the UK, where we can see issues in terms of COP, you know, under certain conditions, you know, 35% of the time, XL20 has a COP greater than 20% better than CO2, and in certain conditions, it can be up to 50% higher COP than CO2. So, you know, probably looking here that, you know, carbon dioxide is not really a good choice for condensing unit applications, whereas products like XL20, you know, with a GWP less than 150, you know, once you're down below about 300, the actual GWP doesn't really matter that much under F-gas. You're going to be sustainable. So, you know, why should you choose A2L refrigerants? You know, we talked about, you know, choosing it over some of the other options, but obviously you're going to have to go to something that's lower GWP. And when you do that, you're going to want to get the best and most cost-effective solution that you can. We just talked about energy efficiency, very important from a sustainability point of view, as well as obviously adding to the cost. Reliability, you know, downtime, how difficult is it to run the equipment? Safety, you know, we're going to talk a little bit later about flammability from that point of view, but we've got now products which are proven to be safe in use. Environmental sustainability, these are products, you know, with a low enough GWP to be possible to use in the long term, past 2030 and into Kigali. And then system complexity, you know, as a contractor, how easy is it to install these products and then maintain them, and how easy is it for an end user to continue to use them for their lifetime? So, what we've done is we've put a lot of those elements together on a single graph, and you can see there that 4048 is actually in red because basically, as I say, it used to be the old baseline, but now because of its very, very high emissions, because of its high GWP, as I said, it's now out of the game. The size of the ball that you see there is the amount of capex. So, you know, HFC, old HFC equipment, relatively cheap to install. But look at the comparisons that we've got now. We've got XP40. We know that new equipment or retrofits with XP40, very cost effective from that point of view. And you can see down there, life cycle costs are very low. But still, the emissions on the relatively high side, and we need to move lower than that to be able to meet the F-gas phase down. So what else could we possibly look at? Air-cooled integrals or water-cooled integrals. These tend to be, you know, hermetic systems with hydrocarbon in there, typically propane. But what we find is that actually, although they're relatively cheap from a capex point of view, they do use a lot of energy, which contributes to their emissions and their relatively high life cycle costs. You know, as I say, CO2 has become very popular as a centralized system, but it only gives us 4% improvement over something like XP40. You hear about secondary loop technologies. This is, you know, propane glycol loops, 134A CO2 pump systems, and whatever. These are the highest of all capex of all the technologies. There are emissions improvements, but actually they're relatively small compared to the additional cost, something like 20 to 22% higher life cycle cost versus the baseline. And the XL refrigerants you can see there, you know, things towards the top right on this graph are less favorable. Things towards the bottom left are more favorable. You can see that the XL40 and XL20 products fit nicely into that bottom left corner. You get the largest emissions reduction, so something like, you know, up to 20% less than you would get with the current products such as XP40 449A, and the lowest life cycle costs, some 16 to 21% lower than some of the other low GWP options that you could consider. So from a value for money basis, the XL products, from the Optimum XL products, are definitely a good choice. I'm just going to talk a little bit more because why has CO2 gained such such a lot of traction, as it were. Well, the key thing is, CO2 does have a GWP of 1. Well, yes, okay, but that's one of the few things really that it's got going for it. If you actually compare one of the best technologies in our climate conditions in the UK, transcritical CO2 with parallel compression, even with the addition of that, because of the thermodynamic properties of CO2, you find that you get a significant reduction in total emissions if you go to an XL product, up to 18% in the climate that's typical of Leicester that we use as our baseline. In terms of life cycle cost, also, again, that there's higher capex in putting in CO2. That's well known. But if you start to then look at the total cost, which includes the amount of energy that you use in the system, you see up to 14% reduction in the Leicester climate on life cycle costs for the A2L technologies versus CO2. So there's actually a clear delineation here, and specifically, obviously, depending on whether you're using a centralized system, there are restrictions on XL products. But if you're looking, for instance, at a condenser unit, it's absolutely clear that the XL products come out on top. So I've talked a lot about the comparisons between the various technologies and why you might want to choose one over the other. And if now you're convinced that A2L and particularly Option XL is the way to go, what do you need to do, and how can we help you adopt these products? Well, the good news is there's a lot of information out there available, and it's all being packaged up by ourselves and our partners such as IDS. So there's a lot of information available to you. One of the things is that people are becoming more knowledgeable about the properties of these products. For instance, what does mildly flammable mean? These products are, as I said, at A2L. What it means is they're very difficult to ignite. In fact, once you get inside between the lower and the upper flammable limits, if you get the right combination of product in there, you need something like a very, very hot wire or a lit safety match to actually cause the products to ignite. Most of the things you see there, including a normal light switch, normal sparks, and most equipment that you use in refrigeration systems will not ignite a flammable atmosphere of an A2L, which is a very important thing to take into account. And if you really want to visualize that, what we've done is we've put together a video that really compares the properties of propane, which is the most commonly used A3 refrigerant out there, and A2L, such as the Option XL20. And you can see just from the stills in there, what the relative, what happens relatively when you ignite them. Obviously, we do everything we can to stop such an event happening. But if it was to happen, you get a very different consequence if you use an A2L compared to an A3. And I advise you to download and watch this video. There'll be a note from Chemours following this webinar, inviting you to subscribe and to have a look at this video and some other information that we've got available to help you understand the properties of A2L refrigerants. As I said previously, one of the restrictions that you do have with these A2L refrigerants is that you have a limit on charge size. But as Peter mentioned, everything you need to know is in EN 37A. Okay, it's we've provided guides to that, so there are written guides that you can download from that point of view. But we know that contractors out there need as much help as possible to understand where and how much product they can use. So what we put together, and this was mentioned in one of the webinars that we did early last year that was just about to be launched. This is now fully up and running, a charge size calculator. And what that allows you to do is to choose the location classification to understand where the equipment's going to be used, who's going to access the area, what refrigerant you're going to use. You can see there the commonly available ones from Chemours are listed there. You can put in the room dimensions, and then that will tell you first of all whether the what sort of charge size you can use without any mitigation, and then allows you to calculate if you do need to use more refrigerant to get the capacity that you require, what additional mitigation you will require, for instance, things such as leak detection or ventilation from that point of view. This is fully up and running and it's available, and there will be a link to it in the email that followed this webinar from Chemours. So, we talked about flammability, we talked about charge sizes. What else do I need to do? Well, actually, there's not a lot more on top of what you should already be doing that you need to do. The DESIR regulations have been actually in place for 6 years, and they apply to all refrigerant gases, not just those which are flammable. Now, obviously, the need to use an A2L refrigerant, a refrigerant that has a level of flammability, brings in probably more urgency, perhaps, to do a risk assessment than before, but there was always a requirement to do risk assessments. The other thing that you've always needed to look at as well is the Pressure Equipment Directive. All fluids come under the Pressure Equipment Directives in refrigeration where pressure vessels are used. I'm not going to go into the detail of this today. I shall leave that up to my technical colleagues in other publications. We are putting together a calculator which allows you to look at the fluid you're using, the sorts of volumes that you might have, and what type of equipment, and allow you to understand the category. In other words, what measures you need to take in terms of brazing and those sorts of things, which you require to use. But you can see from the list there that all the common refrigerations that you might be using in the future, and including ones that you may have used in the past, fall under PED and need to be looked at. But it's all right telling you that these things need to be done, and there may be not things that you'd be very familiar with, and you might need to dust off some of your old training stuff from that point of view. But the good news is there's a lot of guidance now available from the industry associations. We're working with the IOR, we're working with FITA, the Trade Association. We have working groups on this, and the idea is to provide lots of guidance out there. And there are also some European associations which are doing the same. We're also working with consultants to the industry and the training bodies to ensure that information is available to as wide an audience as possible, because A2Ls are with us and need the take up needs to increase, as Alan said in his introduction. We're also providing support and guidance through IDS Climalife, and a lot of the information they'll be providing, we will help them put that together. So I advise you to look at their knowledge center that they're putting up. There was a time when we did these presentations that we would go through a whole list of the equipment manufacturers. There's just too many to go through now. There's equipment appearing all the time. Just go out there and ask for the kit you want. And if it's not available, the particular capacity that you want is not available today, it's very likely to be available very shortly. So the equipment is no longer a rate determining factor as far as it's concerned. And if you go to your wholesaler, they should have at least condensing units and compressors available for you to be able to put together the information, the equipment that you want for the application that you desire. We've got so many case studies now that I'm not actually going to go and spend a lot of time on them, but you can see some of the big names there. Asda with modular packs in hypermarkets, the Co-op in terms of the convenience store application with with small packs, condensing units in cold stores. This is very popular, particularly products like XL40 for low temperature cold stores, which we've been running with some time. So we've got both retail and non-retail applications, as well as I've said in air conditioning and chillers. So the products are there, the products are out there, and it's just a matter of getting them, of getting to grips with them. And finally, one that's perhaps a bit closer to home, Riverford Organics wanted to put a cold store in for a cold room in for the food that their staff eat in their canteen. Master have put together basically a condensing unit and evaporator unit. All the calculations are done as far as refrigerant charge is concerned. Just over 1 kilo is used in this particular unit in this case study. And the important thing to understand there is that Riverford, who are an organic farming cooperative, have an environmental and ethical ethos, and they look to see, well, what are the types of product that we could use, refrigerant that we could use for our new facility, and they chose XL20 because basically it has as well as being very cost effective, it has the lowest energy emissions compared to a comparable CO2 system. So for them, it was a no-brainer. And you will see, further information about the condensing units from a number of different manufacturers in the news day to day. So this is my summary. Very low GWP long-term sustainable solutions are available from in the XL range, and we believe these are the sensible choice and right now. So thank you very much for your attention today, and I think we're going to open up for questions, Mel.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That was a really clear and informative presentation. I'm very conscious of time. We've gone over by about 4 minutes, so we do want to try and answer some of the questions, but we might have to cut that a little bit shorter than originally planned, but we will absolutely follow up on all of the questions afterwards. So I'm going to crack on with the first one quickly. What are the long-term plans for R32 and VRF systems, as it does not seem to be a long-term solution? Peter, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think, well, it's probably not necessarily ourselves that can answer that question thoroughly. It's down to the equipment manufacturers. But I think R32 and 454B are very much solutions. As you heard me during my talk, there's still a lot of people using 410A. There is very much a need to move to the lower GWP refrigerants. Whether come 2030, R32 still falls under the correct remit for new equipment, I think that's something to consider over the next few years. But for the time being, R32 is the right refrigerant to be using at the moment.
Okay, thanks. Did you want to add anything to that, Mark?
Not really. I think the bigger applications are always a concern, obviously from that point of view. But obviously R32 certainly in small splits is going to dominate for quite some few years.
Okay. The next question: what is the efficiency comparison of 473A versus 472A and R23 in low temperature applications? Peter, to give that one to you.
They're both very new products that have only just sort of been announced in the last few weeks, and so we've really got to go on at the moment is what the manufacturers of those two refrigerants say. The 473A is from Cora, and they're saying that they've got improved cooling capacity and energy efficiency compared to R23, and it can work down to -75, whereas the 2A has a much lower GWP, and it's been developed in Italy by someone who makes low temperature cabinets. They're saying that the energy efficiency compared to R23, exact details are not forthcoming, but I'm sure there'll be a lot more information on these products. And realistically, I guess it needs sort of some testing to be done on both these refrigerants by the people who make the cabinets, which I believe is starting to happen.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to do a couple more questions and then we'll have to cut it there, I'm afraid. So what can I use for LTDX applications around 30 degrees C SST that has a relatively low GWP, say 600 or below, and is not an A2L? I'm going to hand that one to Mark.
Yeah, I think we're talking about low temperature applications and whatever, and you're saying not A2L. I think that's a bit pie in the sky now. I mean, there are products around, but they tend to have higher GWP. If you want something that's less than 600, you're talking about using an A2L really, or you're talking about going to something like ammonia if that's available to be used. But I say not all applications, like cold stores, for instance, are able to use ammonia, and so an XL20 or an XL40 is, and particularly an XL40 is probably a very good choice for that type of application. I would recommend to use that one if it can be applied.
Did you have anything to add to that, Peter, at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think the options is a CO2, an A2L such as the 454A, or ammonia. So there's a very much limited. It depends on the application exactly where the person asking the question is using it.
Okay, all right, thank you. So this will be the last question then. Any thoughts on the UK F-Gas review due in 2022? Throw that out to both you, Mark and Peter. So, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the UK is following the basically the same protocols as the EU. The UK and the EU, obviously only just only just split. So, but they're doing, the UK is doing its own review, and trade bodies and others, you know, are able to get involved with the consultation, which is opening up to have that dialogue. I think the idea is to keep things steady as they go and make what we've already got work. So making F-gas work, I think, is the important point. One of the areas being, you know, getting to grips with the illegals, and certainly for the UK, ensuring that our borders from an F-gas point of view are secure, and that the product that's sold on the market here is covered by quota, and not coming from you know, illegal sources or non-quota covered sources.
Thanks, Mark. Peter, did you want to add to that at all?
No, I think Mark's covered that. I think the UK doesn't have to follow what the EU does, but I don't think we will really start to know what the EU is thinking till either the very end of this year or the beginning of next year, and they'll probably spend the whole of 2022 trying to work out exactly what to do. The UK could, depending on the consultation process that takes place this year, could decide to move faster, could decide to move slower, but I think we'll just have to wait and see, and probably there'll be a lot more webinars when we've got more information on that subject.
Yeah, and Mel, if I could just add, I don't think there's, you know, putting advertisement in for our trade associations, I don't think there's been a more important time to be, you know, a part of a trade association and whatever. And if you have the opportunity, you know, to sign up to the BRA or whatever, I think it's very important, because that's your voice to the UK government, you know, and you know, it's not into Europe now that we've got to go directly interact with DEFRA and get our messages across. So very, very important that people get their voices heard through our trade associations. So yeah, just a plug for them.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. Okay, well, that's our final question for today. We've had loads of questions, actually, so thank you everyone for submitting those. We'll make a note of every single one of them, and we'll get back to everybody with answers for those questions, and we will also publish them on our website in the next few days. So as we wrap up today's webinar, I'd just like to thank our speakers today, Alan, Dave, Peter and Mark. And I'd also like to thank you all for joining and listening to us today. We really hope you found the webinar interesting and useful. If you'd like to follow up directly with any additional questions or would like any more information on the points discussed today, please do not hesitate to get in touch. Thanks again to all of you for joining. Stay safe, and we look forward to hearing from and hopefully seeing some of you very soon. That's the end of the webinar.